you very much for everyone's patience today and for this of our late start. We're really happy that you can be here for our town hall. I'm really thankful that you're here, and we hope that you'll learn a lot. I'm actually going to turn it over to Hongmei Peng, who is Chinese for Affirmative Action's Director of Advocacy and our facilitator for today.
Thank you so much, Eva. Welcome, and thank you to each and every one of you for joining us tonight at Chinese for Affirmative Action's Town Hall on Proposition 16, Economic Opportunity and its impact on Chinese American communities in the state of California. My name is Hongmei Peng. I'm the Director of Advocacy at Chinese for Affirmative Action. We are a 51-year-old civil rights community-based organization headquartered in San Francisco's Chinatown with a mission to defend and protect the political and civil rights of Chinese Americans and advance a multiracial democracy. Since CAA's founding, we have been on the ground ensuring that opportunities are available to all in the realm of supporting equitably accessible workforce development programs, diversifying our public sector, and ensuring that Chinese communities in San Francisco have a bite at the apple when it comes to economic development for Asian American small businesses by negotiating community benefits with developers, all the way to ensuring that people are able to find good jobs. Last month at CAA, in partnership with Chinese American, Meigo Huaren, we had a town hall about education equity, but there was so much that was not being covered. This particular town hall will focus on workers and small businesses and how Asian American communities will benefit from the ladders of economic opportunity that will be created as a result of Proposition 16. In the breadth of our work to promote equity and justice, we have sued to uphold the promise of civil rights movement to the Supreme Court to mandate bilingual education and non-discrimination based on language and national origin. We have diversified the San Francisco Fire Department. We have challenged hiring discrimination in the police department and linked arms with other disenfranchised people who also face the realities of racism and sexism in the United States. It is no surprise that we are leading the charge on Proposition 16 to reinvigorate these actionable solutions, to lift the ban on race and gender conscious programs and unlock the door and pathways that enable our communities to access the boundless opportunities after they leave school. I want to kick us off by tuning into Ladders, a short video that was produced by the Opportunity for All campaign on intersectional ways that Prop 16 would remove barriers and increase opportunities for historically disenfranchised communities in the United States. I hope you enjoyed.
在加州，我们相信每一个人都应该有平等发展的机会，不论收入水平、找好工作，还是进入顶尖大学读书。但实际上，社会资源和权力往往被少数富裕阶层占据。与此同时，许多加州人却因为肤色和族裔受到歧视。从事同样的工作，女性的收入水平只能达到男性收入的80%，单亲妈妈和少数族裔女性的工资水平更低。尽管小企业是加州经济的支柱，但是几乎所有政府合同都给了由年长白人男性经营的大公司。女性和少数族裔虽然努力工作，却得不到公平竞争的机会。Prop 16让每一个人都有了公平上升的路径。通过确保女性和少数族裔获得公平雇佣和晋升机会，我们可以缩小工资差距，我们可以确保政府合同的分配对所有企业一视同仁，确保高质量的公共教育对每个人开放，争取种族平等。我们迎来了一个历史性的时刻，并且帮助那些受新冠疫情影响最大的人群。团结一心，我们能够阻止歧视，重塑社会机制，让所有加州人都有能够获得成功的机会。
In the next part of our program, I want to welcome my good friend, partner, and colleague in this work to advance equity and justice in the state of California, Stephen Chen, who is a prolific writer for Chinese American and also a partner at CRW Strategies LLC. Stephen, would you please share your comment?
Thank you, Hongmei. 大家好，我是 Stephen Chen， 美国华人公众号的作者和编辑， 欢迎你们参与今天的活动。现在离选举只有35天了。对于加州的华裔选民，16号提案是一个令人关注的提案。16号提案包含了3个方面：公共教育、公共就业和公共合同。我们知道公共教育非常重要，但是获得好的教育并不是终极目标。大学毕业后的漫漫长路对人生来说才更为重要。长期以来，美国的各行各业一直牢牢地掌握在男性白人手中。20世纪60年代推出的平权法案是为了让女性和少数族裔有一个向上发展的机会。平权法案的推出给女性和包括华裔在内的少数族裔在教育、工作等方面带来了翻天覆地的变化。1996年，加州通过的209号法案禁止了加州在公共教育、公共就业和公共合同方面实行平权法案，这使得加州失去了帮助女性和少数族裔发展的一个有效工具。而16号提案就是要把这个工具放回到工具箱里。那么16号提案到底对今天的华裔在公共就业和公共合同方面意味着什么？下面我们就来听听几位来自于政府、议会、非营利组织和华裔社区人物分享他们的经验和看法。今天这个活动与总统辩论会是在时间上有一点冲突，我们会给那些无法参与这个活动的朋友们提供视频。Back to you, 后美。
Thank you so much, Stephen. I always feel so activated after hearing you talk about affirmative action and really appreciate your partnership and Chinese Americans' partnership with Chinese for Affirmative Action. Next, I want to introduce and welcome the Honorable Ms. Mabel Tang, who is a former member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and the former San Francisco Assessor Recorder. Mabel is a powerhouse Chinatown activist and immigrant rights organizer. We're very lucky to have her join our movement, and I'm personally very thankful for her as a trailblazing Asian American woman in public leadership. Mabel is a co-petitioner in the Prop 16 Chinese language ballot lawsuit earlier this year to expand language access for limited English proficient voters in California, and ensuring that we establish a civil rights through line between the long-standing historical fight on language access and the reinstatement of equal opportunity here in California. Welcome, Mabel.
Thank you, Hongmei. I'd like to welcome everyone, and thank you, CAA, for hosting the town hall tonight. We all have worked so hard to be visible on equal opportunity. Let me just start by saying 38 years ago in Detroit, Michigan, in an environment that saw the rise and competition of Japanese cars, Vincent Chin was brutally murdered by 2 auto workers, calling him Jap and taking away Americans' job. Today, 38 years later, we hear Donald Trump blame COVID-19 on China, calling the coronavirus the Kung flu, the Wuhan flu, agitating hatred towards Chinese. Thousands of Asian Americans have been the target of racism and violence this year alone. This is the moment. This is the eye-opening opportunity to be vigilant, resilient, and visible, and to speak up for equal rights and equal opportunity for all. We have 45 days, like Stephen said, from now to November 3rd, that you and every California voter will have the power to be a game changer and to be a change maker, to reverse a law that has done harm to Asian Americans in public employment, contracting, and admission. This is the moment to vote yes on Proposition 16. In discussing the economic impact, What does your yes vote mean for the community? Your voting yes on Prop 16 will enable more Asian Americans, women, and minority people in gaining employment with government agency, all levels of government agency. How? Government will have to reach out to us. Government will have to let us know through our newspaper, media outlets, including translation into our native language. They have to come and recruit us. It put us on an equal footing. Similarly, Asian and women small businesses in California will gain equal access, working along with other minority small businesses. We will gain equal access to over $1 billion worth in contracting, from purchasing supplies, equipment, to construction and roadworks. This is the moment to be a game changer, to be vigilant, resilient, and visible for equal opportunity and equal rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mabel. Yes, we have to say yes in November to Proposition 16. Also, we can't do this on our own. We can't do this by ourselves. I want to introduce another co-petitioner on the Chinese language ballot lawsuit for Proposition 16. I want to welcome Jing Sun to the program to provide some comments. Jing has been living in the U.S. for 20 years. He has received an MBA degree from UC Irvine. As a realtor, he's also the founder of Orange County Chinese Parents Book Club. He is a strong advocate for the Chinese Americans in Irvine to get involved in community life through politics, education, culture, and sports. He is a fierce champion for equity and a leader within the Chinese language community in Southern California and now throughout the state with his involvement on Proposition 16. You might have already heard him speak last time, provide his testimony on a panel on Proposition 16 Town Hall on education equity. And we're so thankful to be in this fight together with you. Welcome, Jing.
好，谢谢红梅。非常感谢 CAA 和这个美国华人今天为我们带来了一个精彩的这个 Town Hall meeting。从我个人来讲的话呢，我也觉得我非常的荣幸，能够有机会来帮助我们这个11月3号这个中文选票这个中文的精确的翻译，贡献我的一份力量。因为我觉得呢，在24年以后，我们来重新审视209法案对加州的影响，从而我们才提出了这个 Proposition 16。那么对我们很多这个华人来讲，他们的英文不是很好，所以说呢，能不能拿到一份准确的中文的投票的翻译，从而呢能够正确理解这个议案会给我们带来的影响，我也觉得是非常重要的。因为我们不能因为我们的语言的问题，从而使我们对这个新的议案做出错误的判断，从而使我们呢整个这个华裔应该可以说是 lost in translation。所以说从这一点来讲的话呢，我也非常高兴，因为我们有了一个非常精准的语言，让我们在投票的基础上呢有一个非常基本的一个平衡的平台。从我个人来讲的话呢，我呢是全面支持这个，应该说完全是 yes on Proposition 16。其实呢，我们知道这个实际上它给我们带来了这种公共就业、公共合同以及公共教育的3方面的影响。从公共就业讲来讲的话，我们都很知道，少数族裔以及女性在这个各个的这个就业领域上，应该说呢是受到了很多的歧视。像一些职位上，一般来讲，妇女呢的工资大概只有男性的80%，也就是说，男性每得1美元的话，女性只能到80美分。这个实际上是非常不公平的。而从这个公共的这个合同上来讲的话，我们也知道，在1996年209法案实施以后，整个加州应该说呢，在过去24年里头，这些少数族裔以及女性占主要的这种企业，他们相当于每年要丢失将近10亿美元的这样的公共合同。原因为何呢？我们其实就以这个圣何塞这个城市来看，其实在之前，圣何塞城市本身呢，为了这些帮助这些少数族裔以及妇女企业，曾经有一样相应的规定，就是规定在每个主承包商在去找分承包商的时候，至少要通知4家这些少数族裔或者女性为主的这种企业，或者呢是在他们公布的这个分承包商的名单上要有这些少数的族裔或女性为主的这些企业 但是由于 Proposition 209的通过，在2000年以后，这样的议案也就被取消了，从而可以看出，从而也就大大的打击了这些少数族裔和这女性企业他们所能够获得的这些承包商的机会。这样呢，也就使得整个圣何塞市可以使看这种少数民族的少数族裔的企业和这些女性企业为主的这些企业，他们整个应该损失了每年将近损失2000万美元的这些承包商的这些工作，这种损失是相当巨大的，以至于呢，在之后我们根本很多时候呢都拿不到这些少数族裔或者女性占主要企业的这些拿到承包商这些分承包商这种合同的数据。我们大家都知道，上一周应该我们说我们经历了非常悲痛的事情，那就是我们的一位大法官 Notorious RBG 的去世。但是呢，在他去世以后呢，他成为了能够把灵柩放在国会山上供后人瞻仰的第一位的女性。这个殊荣是非常巨大的。这个呢，也使我不禁的想到，从我们这种华裔来讲的话呢，其实我们呢有很多的这些工程师、会计师、精算师，但是我们看一看呢，我们有没有想过，我们在我们的下一代中能不能出几位法官 ？RBG 的一生呢，都是在为女性的权益而奋斗。虽然他本身也受到了很多的这种歧视，但是他一直没有放弃自己的奋斗。而他能够去成功的当选为这个最高法院的大法官，其实呢也是受益了这些民权运动、这个平权运动的对少数族裔、对女性的这个考虑，才有此机会。如果没有这些平权运动的话，我们可以想想，从美国到现在，114位大法官中，不可能出现2位非裔大法官以及4位女性大法官。那如果在全都是白人男性的大法官的法庭当中，我们可以想一想，他们能不能够听到我们这个多元化社会这些底层人们的哭泣和呐喊。60年代，马丁·路德·金曾经带领着众人在街头游行，推动应该说是少数民族的这个民权运动。我相信我们很多人都没有机会去参加。今天我们看到了这个民权运动的胜利，但是我们应该是看到这个胜利来的是非常的不容易，是非常艰辛的。同样，今天在我们推进 Proposition 16的时候，一样也面临着巨大的阻力。所以呢，在这里最后呢，我是想向那些在为 Proposition 16说 yes 而默默奋斗，同时呢又遭受了很多不公平的待遇、人身攻击的这些朋友们说，我想说什么呢？我想说，你们就像天上的星星，可能你们现在还不能完全照亮夜路，但是正是由于你们的存在，才使赶夜路的人有了希望。好，谢谢红梅。
Thank you so much, Jinsun, for your comments. Hi, everybody. My name is Eva Poon, and I work at Chinese for Affirmative Action. I'm going to share a few data points with you about why we need to support Prop 16. So it is estimated that because of Prop 209, women and minority-owned businesses lose out on $1 billion in contracting opportunities each year. These are not savings for taxpayers. These are contracts that went to other companies. And these companies are most likely larger firms that are owned by white men that know how to navigate the government system. Right now, people of color and women cannot access government contracts. Caltrans, which is one of the state's largest departments, estimated that more of their contracts should go to women and people of color-owned businesses, based on the availability and number of firms who meet their criteria. Yet we see that it is not happening. We have seen the need for Prop 16 because race-neutral policies are ineffective. In San Francisco, with its very large Asian population, only 6% of contracts go to Asian-owned businesses, and 7% of total contracting dollars go to these businesses. It's easier for Asian business owners to get contracts in cities like Atlanta and Chicago than in San Francisco. San Francisco's race-neutral policies, like its local business enterprise programs, fail to provide women and people of color-owned companies with contracting opportunities. Prop 16 can lead to more public contracting opportunities for women and minority-owned businesses. It's important to note that race and gender will not determine the outcome of bids, but it would be one of the factors that can be considered. In cities that implement Prop 16, we may see policies like requirements for agencies to do outreach to all available and qualified firms. It's about making sure that all the firms that are qualified have a shot at the bid. We would also see programs that are specialized training programs, as well as technical assistance to help these companies owned by women and people of color navigate the very complicated certification and bidding process. We have seen during this COVID-19 crisis how Asian Americans need access to economic support and opportunity. Prop 16 would help Asian-owned businesses survive and thrive after this pandemic is over. Prop 16 also means better job opportunities in the public sector. Public jobs can include all industries from healthcare to safety to education to jobs and infrastructure. Right now, we're seeing that minorities and women that work in the public sector tend to be in the lower paying, lower status positions. They are not in leadership roles and they lack decision-making power. We know that diversity really matters and that it's important to have public servants that know our communities. With Prop 16, we can make sure that people who are not fluent in English can also access adequate emergency services. We'll have more teachers of color who can communicate with our families. And overall, Prop 16 will mean a more culturally relevant and accessible government for all of us. I do want to point out that affirmative action also impacts Asian Americans who work in the private sector. When public agencies have affirmative action policies, this spills over to the private sector. Companies often follow the example of the government. We see that diverse companies are actually more profitable and more successful. Prop 16 is all about creating pathways for greater workforce participation and career development for women and people of color. I will now turn it over to my colleague Hong Mei to introduce our fireside chat speakers.
Hi again, everyone. I feel like, we've heard from leaders in the community, we've heard the data, we've heard the statistics, and what we know is that Proposition 16 will open doors to actionable solutions to address racism and sexism in public contracting and employment. For today's town hall, we want to dig into that. We also know that it does not prescribe policy. It simply repeals the outdated policy that was passed in 1996 called Proposition 209 that bans race and gender conscious considerations and programs. State and local government agencies can work in partnership with communities like ours to develop implementation plans around public contracting and employment to level the playing field for women and people of color. Today's fireside chat is a deep dive to discuss how Asian Americans are beneficiaries and support affirmative action, and to talk about some of the barriers that we experience due to this ban on race and gender conscious programs. Proposition 16 can pave a path forward that includes us, that is responsive to our needs, and to be able to speak to the diverse communities that live in California. I want to welcome our panelists who will be able to share some of their thoughts and insights around this issue. First, Dr. Albert Wang, who's born in Taiwan and came to the US at the age of 14. Dr. Wang graduated with honors from UC Berkeley with a BS in biochemistry and an MD from UC San Diego. and currently serves as a director and immediate past chair of the board of directors for the 1,600 doctor-strong Palo Alto Foundation Medical Group. Dr. Wang has been heavily involved in community service. He has served as the president of the American Cancer Society Northern California Chinese Unit and board member of the ACS California Division. He and his wife, Anna, were founders of Friends of Children with Special Needs, a full-service charity serving the needs of largely Chinese American immigrant families with special needs children. In addition, he has been involved in civil rights and civic empowerment organization and is currently the National Vice Chair of Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Association, also known as APAPA. He's the chair of APAPA Bay Area region, as well as president of the Asian American for Good Government Political Action Committee. For his long history of community service, Dr. Wang was honored with the American Cancer Society Silicon Valley Regional Lifetime Volunteer Achievement Award, a League of Their Own Award from the Fremont Education Foundation, KQED Disability Culture Award, the California State Assembly Outstanding Leader Award, World Journal Community Hero Award, and Best Doctor in the Tri-City area by the Tri-City Voice newspaper, among others. Next, we're very happy to welcome Helen Lei. Helen Lei is an immigrant from Guangzhou, China, who grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown. She currently serves as a management analyst fellow for the city of Los Altos in the administrative department, working on special projects for the city's finance, human resources, and information technology division. Ms. Lei has more than 10 years of experience working in government, community, and public affairs in the private sector, the nonprofit sector, for the city and county of San Francisco, in the House of Representatives, on several political campaigns. She has a Bachelor's of Arts from UCLA in Global Studies, Asian American Studies, and a minor in Chinese. Ms. Lei received her Master in Public Affairs from UC Berkeley Goldman School of Public Policy. Last but not least, we have Tracy Zhu. Ms. Zhu is a Chinese for Affirmative Action board member. She is born and raised in San Francisco in an immigrant household. She and her siblings benefited from many school-based nonprofit programs that were intended to provide opportunities and access to low-income first-generation college students. A graduate of Lowell High School in San Francisco, she firmly believes in righting the wrongs of the past to bring about justice to communities that have been marginalized and excluded. She has over a dozen years of professional experience as an environmental educator, clean air advocate, grant maker, and public servant. She has advanced environmental and racial justice by bringing more resources and opportunities to low-income communities of color throughout the Bay Area. She currently works for the City and County of San Francisco at the Public Utilities Commission as a Social Impact Partnership Manager. Thank you all for being here today. We want to kick off today's conversation on a personal note. Tracy, Albert, and Helen, can you share your personal journey and what led you to support affirmative action and Prop 16? We'll start with Tracy.
Oh, are folks able to hear Tracy?
Tracy, I'm sorry. I think your microphone has gone out on us. Can we try switching to your microphone device again?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I apologize. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for this town hall. Just briefly, my name is Tracy Zhu. I was born and raised in San Francisco. My parents are from Toisan, and I grew up in a family of 6 children. My experience with affirmative action is that I went to a high school, a Lowell High School, that was not very diverse. I would say it's predominantly Asian and white. And what really surprised me about growing up and going to Lowell is that I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood in San Francisco, in Bayview Hunters Point, where there were African Americans, there were Latinos, there were Asians, Asian immigrants, and that was not represented in my high school. And that, I think, really took away from my experience of what people say is a very diverse city. And for my education to not reflect the diversity of San Francisco, I think takes away from our personal experience. Now I work in the public sector. I work for the City and County of San Francisco at the Water, Power, Sewer Department. And really what I've experienced in working in local government is that the ban on affirmative action has really prevented us from having really frank, clear, honest conversations about inequality in San Francisco, and not being able to talk about race directly really hampers the government's ability to right the wrongs of the past and address inequalities head on. And so this is as simple as government being able to create scholarship programs specifically for Asian Americans, or loan programs specifically for Asian American business owners. And so I'm looking forward to sharing more of my personal experience on why we should be overturning the ban on affirmative action.
Thank you so much, Tracy. We're going to turn to you, Dr. Wang Albert, to share a little bit about your journey and why you support affirmative action in Prop 16.
Sure, thank you so much. I think you made a great introduction of myself, so I don't need to belabor the point. I, being much older than all of you, have a longer life experience with affirmative action. And I think as an immigrant from Taiwan and believer of hard work, going to school and so on, and doing well in school, I did not realize the difficulties suffered by many other minorities. Not just economically, but also just racial prejudice on everyday life. I had the fortunate experience of living with an African-American student in medical school for 3 years. We drew for these new apartments that were just built for students. I was lucky to get a 2-bedroom apartment, and he came to my door and asked me, say, can I be your roommate? Because he lost the lottery. I said, sure, why not? I've never I have never befriended an African-American before that. I went to UC Berkeley, which, as you know, is heavily Asian as well. And where I went to high school in Sunnyvale was mostly white. There are very few African Americans. But that experience changed my view of the world completely, because he's from South Central LA, from a single mom family, who was lucky enough to have the mother's support to go to a private school. Because if you came out of South Central LA public school, we probably would not have had many opportunities, although it was not one of your top private schools that we Chinese Americans think of, but nevertheless got an adequate education. Went to UC Davis, then went to veterinarian school briefly, and then decided to rather treat people than animals. So we had 3 years together living there and studying together. In medical school, we stay up very late to study, both of myself and him. He did that. And sometimes in the middle of the night, to say 1 o'clock in the morning, we'll come out and have a little snack and a little drink. We chat about our lives. So I learned a lot about him, and he learned a lot about me. Now, he's not befriended an Asian American either, particularly a Chinese American immigrant. So he gained experience of what we are like, and I gained the experience what he was like. I learned about his uncle being stopped by the police for no reason, his cousins and etc. beaten by police, and him being afraid of. Even as a doctor, years later, he lives in a upper middle class neighborhood. He could not own a fancy car because they would think it's a drug dealer. He could not own a lousy car because the cops would stop him because he didn't belong to the neighborhood. In fact, he was stopped in front of his house one time by police just to question why he's there. So the opportunities are not equal. Unfortunately, still 50 years into civil rights movement, we're still where we are. So I do believe affirmative action will provide the opportunities of people who are still discriminated against. It is not one of these things people will talk about, say merit, you test higher, therefore you should go to a school. You have done this job longer, therefore you should get this job. We have to provide opportunities for people who are disadvantaged, and if nothing else, for societal stability, for people to have a hope for the future. Otherwise, we will be entering a historically chaotic moment, which actually we're already kind of entering into, but hopefully it will reverse. So I am strongly in support of affirmative action in those areas, particularly economically in terms of Asian American being able to advance itself. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Helen, we're going to turn to you. Can you share a little bit about your story and why you support affirmative action in Proposition 16?
Helen's hiding from us.
May, I'm sorry to say we're having a rough night. I think Helen has dropped from the session. Hopefully we'll have her back on shortly.
That's all right. Maybe what we'll do is have her introduce herself when she gets back. But before we sort of get into all that, maybe one way that we can sort of like keep the conversation going, since, I think, Tracy, you had shared a little bit about, your background and your work in San Francisco. I think that one of the pieces of, information that we want to communicate to the audience is that, Prop 16 would enable state and local governments to consider race and gender in the realm of public contracting and employment to create these pathways to economic opportunities for women, for minority-owned businesses, as well as ensure that we have a very diverse civil service workforce so that we can speak to the needs of all of California. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about the barriers that exist for Asian Americans, especially Chinese communities in this realm. I was wondering, Tracy, if you can share with us how economic development systems are so much intertwined with racism and sexism, and how does this history manifest in our public contracting system?
Thank you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, great. Great, so thank you for asking this question. I think we have to go back in history and understand a little bit about how not everyone had the same opportunities and how that there has been uneven economic development. We know that government has played a role in discriminating against Asian Americans and other communities of color. And to give specific examples, there's a history of redlining where banks said there are certain neighborhoods that cannot get loans to start a business or to buy a home. And these neighborhoods were identified primarily if they were people of color. And so this history of redline, other examples is that we know that only very recently in the past 60 to 70 years, can Asian immigrants, they couldn't own property before 60, 70 years ago. And so this has really reduced our ability to access traditional loans. And even today, we know in our own communities that we're more likely to borrow money from our families and to access traditional loans and capital in order to build up our businesses. And so with this history of inequality that impacts a lot of communities of color, that means we started at a different place than white people. And so when we talk about affirmative action, we need to remember that California had affirmative action and the ability to use race to factor into contracting and public hires. And that during that time, we know that there were more contracting dollars that went to Asian-owned businesses and other minority-owned businesses when we had affirmative action. Now that we have banned the use of race in public contracting, and that we, the data point was shared earlier, only 6% of San Francisco contracts go to Asian American contractors, is that there's fewer businesses who know how to bid on public contracts. That means there's fewer contractors who know how to go through the system, understand the government's financial system, who know how to meet the requirements. So there's less of these businesses to share knowledge with each other. And that really just makes it even harder for more businesses to get into the business of doing business with the city. And so by instituting affirmative action, we can actually create really specific, first collect data and understand this issue better, and then two, create more specific programs that can then target those groups that are being left out. Happy to add more later.
Yeah, that's great. I think it really debunks this myth that, only unqualified, people would be able to kind of get some preferential treatment, right, as an extension of affirmative action. I want to actually now turn to Albert to maybe share a little bit about why this myth is actually kind of bunked before we re-invite Helen back to the conversation since she's able to join us. So, Dr. Wang, tell us, we've been hearing this myth that affirmative action is preferential treatment for, less qualified candidates to get jobs, and it's just based on their, race and their gender. Why is this a flawed perspective based on your experience and your, tenure in the medical field, in the community?
My answer to that is, you've got to be kidding that I am going to hire a doctor who is going to kill my patients, who is going to cover for me when I'm not there, who is not capable of doing the job. Now, this whole thing is about merit. Of course, there is some merit in terms of how capable one is to do a job, but there are often multiple people who are qualified to do the same job. But because of color, because of the way they behave themselves, because of the culture they come from, perhaps even the way they talk, like Asian Americans are often not fancy talkers. We're not trained to do that, although I think you guys are sort of exceptions anyway. But they are just disadvantaged. They may be totally capable of doing the job, but because of these unconscious or conscious biases, they were not selected to take the job. And same would apply to other people of different color, of different culture, of different sexual orientation, for example. There are certainly people who harbor discrimination against LGBTQ population and will not offer them an opportunity even if they're capable. So in my experience of hiring people, of course, qualification is the most important thing. If they cannot treat patients, we certainly don't want them. I don't care if they're purple or green or blue, we're not going to hire them. But if they are capable of doing the job, and we are providing opportunity for someone who has less opportunities when they were younger in getting there, which actually shows that they're even more capable, their drive is stronger, they're working harder to get there, that we would like to have that person in our midst. Now, if it doesn't perform, that's fine. Once you step into our medical group, it does not matter you went to Harvard, Stanford, or lesser medical school, or trained in some little hospital instead of Mass General. It doesn't really matter. You treat patients, you communicate with patients, you don't do the job, you're gone. You do a good job, you stay. So that's really a myth of people hiring people who just can't do the job, just to put a face there, a head on that desk, and it doesn't make any sense to me.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm glad that, we have you championing, this equity framework in the medical field. And I think it definitely is very intersectional, right? So it's not just race,
Yes.
not just, your sexual orientation, but gender is a part of this. So
Yes.
Helen, welcome back. Tonight's the night of technical Murphy Law. We would love to hear a little bit about your journey, but also tell us, what are your thoughts, right? As a woman who's working in public service and based on your political activism, what are some of the barriers to equal opportunity that you notice, that you have experienced or that you have come into contact with?
Yeah, thank you so much, Hongmei. I really appreciate everyone's patience. I guess my Wi-Fi has the best timing, but I'm really excited to join today and to share a little bit about myself. So as you mentioned, I currently work as the Management Analyst Fellow for the City of Los Altos. So before joining the City of Los Altos, I went to graduate school at Berkeley for my master's in public affairs. And for me, finding a workplace that has a mission I can align myself with has always been of importance to me. And right after I graduated undergrad in 2009, that's when there was a massive job freeze. And unfortunately, what happened was I wasn't able to secure employment right after I graduated. So I decided to do the second best thing, which was basically go to Washington, DC and intern for OCA, formerly known as Organization of Chinese Americans. So that was a great opportunity for me because I was able to work on Capitol Hill and also under a congresswoman who was part of the Tri-Caucus, which is the Congressional APA Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, as well as the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So this was a great opportunity for me just because it helped me contextualize a lot of what it meant to be a person of color. And also it made me value the opportunity I was given through OCA, going on to the Capitol and being able to see other people that looked like me at the highest form of government. So during my late teens and 20s, I really discovered what it meant to be a person of color. And I really enjoyed how I had the opportunity to represent and also serve my community in various things that I participated in, whether that was volunteering or being a student organizer. So after leaving DC, I actually returned back to San Francisco, trying to find my niche to serve the community. Unfortunately, it took me a while, and luckily, I was actually selected as a Paul Bach Fellow, the Pacific Asian American Women Bay Area Coalition, and I served as a fellow for the City and County Office of the Department on the Status of Women before doing some political campaigns. So I guess my main point is that even though personally I did not benefit from affirmative action, I believe that throughout my childhood and especially during my late teens and 20s, I really benefited with the idea of providing an equal playing field. I was very fortunate in the sense that even though I was not born into wealth and I did not have a lot of cultural currency around me, I had people who believed in me and provided me with opportunities throughout. And I was able to participate in a lot of different like great mentorships and fellowships and meet a lot of incredible women and men through different organizations and cultures. So that's my piece, a little bit about me. And I think it's actually very upsetting when I think about the idea of the Asian American minority myth, because I feel like it sort of creates a lot of second guessing, imposter syndrome, especially for Asian American women trying to be in the public sector, whether it's representing your organization or working in local government. So that's what I have to say, because I feel like at a certain point, you're good enough. Like you wouldn't even be able to get an interview with a certain organization if you weren't good enough.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Helen. And, we've heard strong, stories about, how women have trailblazed and they have, lifted entire communities behind them to break that glass ceiling, right? But I think that for the Asian American community, especially for women, we have to deal with the glass ceiling, but then there's also this other phenomenon known as the bamboo ceiling. I want to turn back to Albert real quick to talk a little bit about this phenomenon around the bamboo ceiling. What is it? And how does it impact Asian Americans in the professional field?
Sure. Going back a little bit to the last time I answered the question, the gender question in medicine, there are now more women in medical school than there are men. And certainly our group has just exceeded more 50% women about 2 years ago. And now women is coming on strong. The men's going to need affirmative action, not the women pretty soon, I think, in medicine. About this bamboo ceiling, I want to give you an example, a personal example of exactly what happened to me. Back in the early 90s, a friend of mine wanted to start a Chinese American chapter for American Cancer Society because her father suffered from cancer and she wanted to help Chinese Americans going through the same process. So I helped her, and over a few years' time, I became the president of the chapter, and I went to regional meetings. So American Cancer Society has national, state, and region and local chapters. And most of the other people in our chapter were mainly native Chinese-speaking people. The English is okay, but they're not as comfortable. But I was more or less by culture. I came here at a rather young age. So I attended these meetings. And American Cancer Society saw something in me, that is to provide them a perspective of Chinese Americans that they did not have on their board of directors in the state of California. Now, I was appointed to the state of California division board. I went on there and I look at these people. They're either big donors, donated millions of dollars, or they're professors at Stanford, or they're Department of Public Health president or whatever they call them, directors. And I was like a little peon who knew nothing compared to them. But I was given that opportunity. As a result, the two things happened. One of them is I benefited a great deal of knowing these people, learning from them, and how nonprofit organization worked. That helped me later in starting multiple nonprofit organizations. On the other hand, American Cancer Society benefited because in the early 90s is when Asian American population finally reached a point that subcategories of Asians could make statistical difference when they parcel out disease statistics. So you could have enough Vietnamese, enough Korean, enough Chinese, Filipinos, and Indo-Americans to have meaningful statistics. And American Cancer Society, I was able to try to advise them on the differences of cancer incidence and mortality for different races. And they have started to collect that data. As a result, they found that Vietnamese American women had an extremely disproportionately higher rate of cervical cancer. So what does that do for you? You know, instead of having a targeted program for everybody to do pap smears, for example, which will be heavy use of resources and perhaps only finding a few cancers, they could more focus the resources on Vietnamese Americans to do preventative screening, and therefore finding cancer earlier, and that benefited both American Cancer Society, Vietnamese American people, and there are other examples of cancer disparity among different nation groups. So that is a win-win situation. I benefited from affirmative action. If I was to be on the California board, if they did not pick me because of my race and understanding of the culture, it would probably take 20 years, 25 years before I get there. But because of affirmative action, everybody won. And I think that's a great example that could apply to many, many, many other fields, both professionally as well as in the nonprofit world. And of course, in government, especially because decision-making power is really important in government. So that's sort of my little personal spiel about why affirmative action is a good idea and why this bamboo ceiling, if broken by affirmative action, is helpful for everyone, the organization as well.
That's great. And, you know, from what we have just talked about in the short 15 minutes, right, we know that racism and sexism manifests itself in structural ways through history, right? It manifests itself in systemic ways through different public policies, but also in attitudinal, personal ways through implicit bias that prevents historically disenfranchised people from being able to take advantage of all the opportunities and then be able to express, right, the potential that we have and the potential that's within our community. So I want to move from the doom and gloom, right, and talk a little bit about solutions and how do we address these challenges. So Tracy, we just saw, you know, Eva's presentation about how Asian American contractors lose out on $1 billion in public contracts. Asian American contractors and women and minority-owned contractors lose out on $1 billion in public contract opportunities in the state of California every year since 1996. When race and gender conscious programs were prohibited. And we know that, you know, in cities like Atlanta that have affirmative action programs, that Asian American contractors win and bid more in public contracts. So I just want to pick your brain, you know, how do these programs that factor in race and gender as one of the many factors, how does it work in public contracting, and why is it important for us to level the playing field?
Thank you for that question. I just want to first start off by saying, if we vote yes on Prop 16, if Prop 16 passes, nothing immediately changes. All it does is repeal a ban. That means repeal a ban. It means that it would be up to local city departments and local jurisdictions like cities and counties and then state government agencies to come up with programs or to come up with their own policies of how they would want to integrate race and gender. It just allows them to do that. It doesn't direct, repealing the ban doesn't direct any city government to do anything. It just gives them the opportunity to utilize race and gender if they want to. So now that we would, you know, in November if it passes, now that if we're able to use race and gender in our programs, here's what it could potentially look like. It means, you know, we first could ask the question of all contractors and all public employees, what is your race and what is your gender? And we could start doing disparity studies and say, hey, look, you know, while the population of San Francisco is, you know, over 30% Chinese, only 6% of those contracting dollars only go to Chinese contractors. We could do more specific data analysis and understand what the problems are. Another example, an anecdotal story is like water departments, for example, we know that there's a lot of Asian engineers, but what we can see just visually is that there aren't a lot of Asian American upper management and Asian Americans in leadership roles. And we would just be able to start sort of analyzing some of that data. Then we could create programs that really target where we're losing out and we're not doing as well as we should be. So for example, we could create revolving loan funds for Asian-owned contractors, because we know for construction contractors to do business with the city, they really need to have access to a lot of capital to pay for the bonding requirements and certain types of contractors insurance that the city would require them to have. And this is why this is how we know a lot of Asian contractors do smaller jobs for people's homes, but don't want to work with the city because they don't have the capital to pay for bonding, for example. And that's money that needs to be held by a financial institution in case something's wrong with the job. That money can then be paid out to the client. And so these are examples of programs. Other programs are mentorship programs between Asian contractors, or mentorship programs between public employees who are Asian to share that information and knowledge. It doesn't necessarily say, just because you're Asian, you'll get the contract, or just because you're Black or Latino, you'll get the contract. It just means that we can better understand what the issues are and create targeted programs that are culturally competent that will meet our needs and help us level the playing field.
That's awesome. And I just want to sort of reiterate, right, that Proposition 16 is written in a way so that it allows for race and gender programs to be reinstituted in the state of California, and that local governments and the state agencies will have to come up with their own implementation plans. And these are great examples of how programs can be implemented and instituted to be able to mend the gap, right? Helen, I want to turn to you. When we spoke, you've mentioned, and this is true, right, that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on communities of color, especially, for non-English speaking communities. There are these multiple barriers at accessing support and aid that is through public agencies, right? And that we know that targeted relief is very much important and necessary for us to all recover in this moment of crisis. So can you talk a little bit about how Proposition 16 could potentially, right, help facilitate a more equitably accessible public service through the public workforce?
Thank you so much, Hongmei, for that question. So I'm just going to jump on Tracy's wagon and just talk about the importance of data gathering. So with COVID-19, it's unprecedented. And I think right now, government is more important than ever, because even though everyone else can shut down and work from home, the government services are still essential. And a lot of people are relying on government employment and also funds and different support services and programs. So for me, my city, we are actually working with the county in terms of providing funds to different small business owners as well as employees of the city and the county to make sure that we could help them get through this time. But I think what's more interesting is my mentor, who works for the city and for the county of San Mateo. They actually have a dashboard on their website. And they have been showing, they use data that they collected in the past, and they're showing data about where are some areas of San Mateo County with the poorest populations. And they're showing how they're collecting these funds and trying to provide these low-income areas with services during this time. So it comes to tell you that how it's very important that we just don't lump everyone in one category, and we really need to look at the numbers and see which areas is more prosperous than others. For example, I live in Mountain View, and a lot of people think of Mountain View as Google headquarters. Everyone's rich. It's very expensive there. But what you don't know is there's actually a lot of homelessness in my area, and there's a lot of people that live in Mountain View because previously, before Google, it used to be a working class neighborhood, and some homes are still affordable. So a lot of the working population in the Silicon Valley, they actually live in Mountain View. So I think that's one piece of the picture that we could look into more when we start collecting all this data and have metrics to actually divvy up the funds. Because I think when things like COVID-19 happens, when there's no existing equity program, things fall through the cracks, and the people that we rely on every day, the people that work in the restaurants, in the grocery stores, those are the folks that are being harmed the most during this time.
That's great. And, I think that you have illustrated the ways that this is a complex issue and it sort of like manifests, right, at multiple levels of our community in the state and in the cities, right, that we live in. So I actually want to start to wrap up this fireside chat. It's been so wonderful having the opportunity to talk to all of you and kind of glean your insights. So I want to close out this conversation, right, and ask a big question, what does equal opportunity mean to you? And you can kind of talk about this from a personal level or even through the lens of your work in the community, the leader in public sector, right, as a civil servant. What does equal opportunity mean to you? We'll start with Dr. Wang. Albert.
Sure, thank you very much. I can start with the cliche that everybody knows, but is being used nowadays sometimes against affirmative action. That is Dr. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. That I have a dream that everybody will not be judged by their color and so on. But that day has not arrived. To say that using that speech against affirmative action is falling in the trap of a false narrative that is completely not reality today. I think all of us learned from the murder of George Floyd how the world is as a Black person compared to when, even as Asian, not to mention whites. And that the world is not, the playing field is not even, the world is not unbiased. Every one of us, including myself, have biases. My hope for the future is all of us realizes that we have biases, both explicit and implicit, some more than others, that when we see a person, we will immediately have some reaction. I went through unconscious bias training. Is completely eye-opening to me that people see snake or spiders, they immediately are fearful, they scream and so on. That is a reaction. That is not reality. The snake is 20 feet from you. It's not going to harm you. That spider is totally harmless to you. But nevertheless, we have that reaction. We must then stop and think about why we had that reaction and look at the facts as to look at the world as the fact justifies. And my dream for the future is that I think some degree of bias in people is unavoidable. It's just the way we're raised. But understanding that we have biases and examine ourselves and look deep into our hearts that we have this problem. And for every reaction we have, we think about it twice before we actually say something or do something is probably the solution to this problem. And in the meantime, we do need to offer people who have less opportunities, who are disadvantaged in the way they grew up, and more opportunity to succeed, if nothing else, for the stability of our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang. I want to thank you and the Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Association for your endorsement of Proposition 16. Means the world to us. I want to turn now to Tracy. With an eye to the future, what does equal opportunity mean to you?
Thank you for that. What it means to me is that, look, there's ways in which in which government has reinforced inequality. And we need to have the opportunity and the tools to reverse those inequalities. Having grown up in a neighborhood like Bayview in San Francisco, not only has Asian Americans faced inequality and discrimination, but so has Black people and so has Latinos and other, again, people of color, as well as women. And really this, reversing the ban on affirmative action really gives the government more tools to be able to reverse the wrongs that have been done to many different groups. And this is not a zero-sum game. It doesn't mean some people lose and some people win. really this just creates more opportunity for more people. And when more people thrive, that means when there's more opportunities for small businesses, when there's more opportunities for people to get jobs in what we know as good paying jobs in the public sector, that means less crime and less poverty all around for everyone. And I experienced that firsthand growing up in a very diverse neighborhood. And so the more opportunities we can create for all, the better all of society will be. And I think that's, you know, why my parents brought me to this country, brought my sisters to this country, and why they had me is because they want us to thrive in a healthy, diverse environment. This means a lot, not only to me professionally, but personally as well.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I feel so hopeful after this picture that you've painted, and just appreciate, you know, your leadership on our board, and also your work at the, in city government. We're gonna, last but not least, turn to Helen to share what you think equal opportunity means to you with an eye towards the future, and then we'll transition to Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you, Hongmei. So I guess for me, equal opportunity is pretty simple. I think equal opportunity is everyone being able to achieve what they want to achieve and not having structural barriers in their way. For me, I think working in both the public sector and the private sector, I think seeing people of color as well as women on boards, commissions, as well as local government, serving in these leadership roles, not having that be the norm instead of being like, oh, this community is so diverse, is something that would be incredible if I could see that in my lifetime. And I think going back, I think having enough funding for all schools and providing that opportunity for students both in Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco or Chinatown in San Francisco, I think that helps even out the playing field, and that actually supports their growth to contribute to the civil society as a whole. Because I think that's where things are breaking down. People don't get the foundation that they need in elementary school or middle school, and they just fall off the radar. So that's my goal. If I could see a board, a commission, a government leadership team that's like diverse and really showcase the different populations of our cities, that'd be amazing.
That's awesome. I want to thank the three of you for joining our fireside chat today. I do kind of feel like I've learned a lot, and we've only touched on the tip of the iceberg. So we're going to transition into Q&A, and I just want to open up the floor to any of our attendees who are participating. We have about 5 minutes or so. We have a couple of questions I want to ask. I think this is sort of from the audience and their Q&A. I know that our staff in the background is sort of answering questions as we go. I just want to be able to address this to the whole Zoom room. So the first question that came in is, some people are saying that Proposition 209 has saved California voters money. Do you think that's true? And so I want to put a fine point on that, which is, we're seeing statistics about how, women and minority-owned businesses have lost $1.1 billion every year. So where did that money go, right? Is it a savings for California taxpayers, or is it just going somewhere else? Do y'all want to tackle that?
I am less well-versed in public contracting business. I do not know where these numbers come from, because tax savings to taxpayers, how does that compare to a potential situation without Prop 209? I do not know that. What I do know, though, is public contracting is a very lucrative business. Some of my friends are engaged in that business. And that because the person who awards a contract, people on this call, not excluded, are not personally saving money or earning money from awarding contracts. Therefore, to people who do that type of work, will feel the easiest way out is to award it to your friends, people that you already know, people who've been doing this for 20 years, 30 years, or 2 generations. That it's extremely hard for other people to break into this business, even if you are fully capable of doing the job and is able to provide a lower price, because their incentive is not there to allow new people into the business. The known quantities save so much work for you. You don't have to help them to apply for a grant. You don't have to, because they may not be well aware of how to report what they do, you don't need to help them. That existing those with the privilege will maintain their privilege forever unless we give a leg up for those who are outside the circle. And I think that is a great reason for, especially for Asian Americans who are immigrants, who just don't know how to apply for these things and how to put the proper language into applications for contracts and how to maintain that contract properly and to not. I'm just in total agreement that the benefit to Asian American is wonderful, is really great. I'm sorry, I'm using President Trump's language. You know, it's great. Are there any other words?
I see some very passionate nodding on the panel, and you know, I think maybe just to also draw a couple of data points from Eva's presentation from earlier, right? Since the disbandment of women and minority-owned business enterprises, right, which is like designated categories for Asian American contractors, to be able to get access to get support for bidding on public contracts. The city has instituted now small and local business enterprises that actually, if you look at the numbers, are owned half by men, and some, you know, there's a huge majority that's also owned by white men, right? So I think that the way that the programs have shifted isn't so much that we're saving $1 billion a year on public contracts, insofar as those dollars are now being awarded to those who have historically benefited from race-neutral, gender-neutral programs, right? Which is kind of, you know, what I think, Albert, you're kind of pointing to, which is that kind of old boys club that is very difficult to break in, especially if you are new to the scene, right? I want to ask one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. How can we guarantee Asian American businesses can be helped if Prop 16 passes? And I'll maybe zoom out a little bit more. How do you think Prop 16 will benefit Asian Americans as it relates to economic opportunities? And any one of you can weigh in.
I'll just say briefly, I think the very first thing is this is a proposition that cancel the ban. So it does not actually do anything per se. There needs to be activity that follows this. Those people who write the rules need to know that the rules need to be fair to the minorities and others and provide the opportunities we talk about. So I would encourage everybody to be looking at whatever area they are in, whether it's business or schools or anything else, employment, to follow whatever comes next. This is typical legislation. It provides a framework, but the devil is in the details. We really need to follow up with that. Otherwise, no one will benefit.
Yeah, and I'll add that to build off of that is, you know, how can we guarantee this will happen? Really, it's your voice as a small business owner. It's your voice as someone who works in public government, that you're speaking to the people who have a huge hand in public contracting and public hiring. And that means, you know, going to your board of supervisors. It means going to the commissions of those agencies that award large contracts. You know, in the city and county of San Francisco, MTA, the port of San Francisco, and the PUC and Department of Public Works are those kinds of agencies that award a lot of contracts. And so making sure those commissions and those boards are hearing you and hearing you hear what kind of programs you would like to see to support Asian contractors, and that those agencies are instituting those kinds of programs. You know, also citywide, there are agencies that support those kinds of efforts. So that those agencies are responsible for monitoring for these goals is really keeping your interest in mind. And
That's great. Helen, and then I think Mabel wants to also weigh in on this very important question. We'll close out.
Okay, so I guess under the current situation, we see a lot of civil unrest in our society. And I think Proposition 16 will just be a step towards gaining more just cause and helping us create a lot of more diversity within our current systems and help undo a lot of the injustices that happened in the past. And I think in general, like creating environments and societies with more equity underlying will help the population at whole gain a better understanding and also help us economically in general. Because a lot of times when we think of the public health sector, a lot of people aren't insured. And in order for us to really help everyone, it's great to put everyone on the same playing field. And I think like Prop 16 will really help us towards that goal.
Mabel, what do you think?
First, Homie, I really want to congratulate you for facilitating such a great conversation, and to compliment what Albert, Tracy, and Helen has said. I just want to kind of bring it back to something that Asian American businesses can really look forward to. If we just look at San Francisco as an example, remember our former mayor, Ed Lee? He used to be the head of purchasing, and he was the one in San Francisco in charge of minority and women-owned businesses. It was under his leadership that Asian American contractors started to build parks, schools, and garages in San Francisco. They received contract to do roadworks, and it really blossomed. It really shows that this diversity is not only a good public policy, and Asian American contractors collectively over the years saved the city a lot of money because they were being very frugal and responsible at the same time. So I think that this really brings us to a good note on how important it is to support Proposition 16.
Thank you so much, Mabel. And on that note, I just want to thank all of our fireside chat panelists, Tracy, Helen, Albert, our speakers, Jing, Mabel, and also CAA staff who have been working tirelessly, behind the scenes. And special shout out to Eva Poon, who's been pulling it together, and our Chinese digital engagement team, who's been recruiting, outreaching, and also our outreach specialist team for really getting the word out and helping us, make sure that our communities are properly informed and that they are aligned on the right side of history. So just a few reminders, because this is an unprecedented election, for folks to take note of the voting timeline that is on your screen. The ballots should be arriving in your mail very soon, first week of October. October 19th is the last day to register to vote. October 27th is the last day to request a vote by mail ballot. And November 3rd is when we turn the tide on election day and when Proposition 16 will hopefully pass. And so, feel free to get in touch with us. This webinar, town hall is being recorded. It will be made available. Thank you. And please get in touch with us over WeChat and follow us so that you are able to get more information and tune in to the latest on Proposition 16. Have a great night. Thank you, everyone.